Louisiana versus all y'all. Jarrett Roser here with Tyler Batiste, the NBA managing editor for The Athletic. He's obviously a Louisiana native, a good friend. He's been on here before talking NBA stuff and otherwise, and it is NBA playoff time. One game down in each of the series. The Pels' first playoff appearance since 2018. And so a lot to talk about with a guy who has a really good national handle on the NBA, the familiarity back here at home with the Louisiana team back in postseason mode. And we'll hit on some LSU players who are in the NBA, and one notably a former number one pick who is in the NBA but hasn't played since last postseason. Tyler, what's going on, man? Exciting time of year always.
Yeah, not much, man. It's just ready for the grind that's already started, and that's going to continue for a few months here when we get to the playoffs and then the finals and then the draft and free agency. It's kind of in a back-to-back thing going on with the NBA until we get to probably mid-July. So it's always fun.
And the NBA playoffs are pretty much the exact opposite of the NCAA tournament, where the NCAA tournament feels like it's here and gone in the blink of an eye and so many games happening so quickly. The NBA is like a month and a half, 2-month ordeal. Just you mentioned grind for you guys covering the next few months, but the playoffs are a grind in and of themselves. What are some things that you're watching and some early takeaways as we've seen now one game of each series in this past weekend?
The biggest takeaway from the opening weekend was probably Boston versus Brooklyn. That was kind of the game of the weekend that a lot of people talked about, and it stood out for a variety of reasons. The thing about it that kind of stood out to me was that, Brooklyn needed a superhero performance from Kyrie Irving, and even Kevin Durant, who didn't have a great shooting day, still needed to get his points, and they still ended up losing that game. And I think there's probably a bit of a concern there for Brooklyn. Everybody kind of assumed that once they made it out of the play-in tournament and they got to the playoffs, they would be in a situation where they'd be maybe the most dangerous 7 or 8 seed ever in the postseason. But Boston is really good. They didn't get lucky with that draw in terms of the 2-7 matchup. And, it looks like if Durant and Irving aren't, the top levels of themselves, can this team put together, four wins in a series, especially against a team in Boston that has, two tempo type guys like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown who are going to show up every night, and you're going to have to deal with them. So if I were Brooklyn, I might be a little concerned about, what we needed to get even as close as we did in game one and then still end up falling short. So that stood out to me. Obviously the top seeds, Phoenix and Miami, having not a whole lot of trouble in their games. I think that was kind of expected just because of the 2 games that Atlanta and New Orleans had to play going into that series. So yeah, the defending champs look good. Memphis stumbled early on. That's going to be a really fun series with Minnesota. So a lot of good action over the first couple of days.
I feel like we've used the phrase unprecedented times so much in just the world in general the last few years.
Right.
And this NBA season, though, there have been so many unusual storylines, some spanning back to COVID dynamics when you watch what happened with Kyrie Irving throughout the season. And that's part of why the Nets are down in that position of being potentially one of the most dangerous, if not the most dangerous 7 seed that the league has seen. You're looking at them in Philadelphia and a major blockbuster trade and everyone wondering what impact that could have on the East playoff series or the Eastern Conference postseason. We're watching kind of at least to start the playoffs, an unprecedented level of success for young players who exploded over the weekend. There was a team that was thought to be a title favorite in the Lakers who missed the play-in tournament entirely and have arguably the most disappointing season that we've seen in a major sport, certainly in our lifetime, maybe farther back. Where do you see kind of the state of the NBA in terms of it's been such a weird stretch and now you're back into a place where you have fans in the stands for a regular season and all of these clashing storylines, ups and downs along the way?
I mean, it's kind of I want to say transition, but it's kind of an interesting time because I don't want to make it sound like LeBron James, is bad at basketball because he still put up, 28, 29 points a game and multiple assists and rebounds and stuff. But going back to kind of what you said, the young talent that's kind of showed up not only through the course of the regular season, but the playoffs, I think is really exciting for the league going forward. Anthony Edwards, getting 36 points in his playoff debut, having a lot of big moments in the playing game as well. Like if Minnesota is a perennial playoff team going forward over the next 4 or 5 years, he's going to be, someone that people know and not just basketball fans. You got John Moran in Memphis, who is, potentially a heavy favorite for most improved player. Probably is going to get a couple of MVP votes. The way they do that balloting, media and folks vote for the top 5 players, so he could absolutely get some votes there. Kawhi Leonard didn't play this season. He's kind of been a guy who's kind of been one of those top 4, top 5 type of players in the league. Steph Curry is still around, but the Warriors have a pretty big youth movement going on with Jordan Poole and Jonathan Kuminga, Gary Payton Jr., all those guys. So it's an interesting time. It'll be interesting to see what the league is in 2 or 3 years. The big man has kind of been back. You got the 3 MVP finalists, or 2 of them are centers, and one is pretty much a center who plays forward in Giannis Antetokounmpo. So it's interesting. It's fun times. There's kind of a new crop of stars coming in. New Orleans has a superstar in its own in Zion Williamson. If he can ever get healthy, we saw flashes of what he could do last season when he was playing on the court, the way he dominated the paint, the way he was just kind of a force to be reckoned with on the offensive end. So, you add him to that Pelicans team and the future looks bright. So yeah, it's a pretty exciting time for the league right now.
I'm glad you kind of transitioned naturally into the Pels stuff. And even if you hadn't brought up the Pels at the tail end of that answer, a couple of things you said lent themselves to the Pels anyway, in terms of the youth and just kind of the outlook for the years to come. The backstory of the Pels, and you have a handle on what the view of that franchise is here, but from a more national perspective and watching it at the higher level scope that you do, how do you view what the Pels are, where the Pels are, what the general public or national media seems to think of the Pels? Because people were ready to write Zion out of New Orleans months ago. This team started 1-12 to start the season, and everyone was kind of writing the season off. And next thing you know, they go on this run, and you're starting to see some people really kind of turn the page on them. Kendrick Perkins coming out and saying, all right, he's bought in. New Orleans saying, we don't care. But I look at the league moving forward, and I don't know that, especially if Zion's healthy, but even without, when you look at who they have there, I don't know that they're not one of the 5 to 10 most intriguing positions in terms of roster, plus some of that draft capital in years to come.
Yeah, I think if you're a franchise like New Orleans, you kind of have to look at some of the quote unquote smaller market teams as kind of a model for what you hope to be. More recently, Memphis, obviously, with what they've done, not only this year when, having the 2 seed in the West, but last year they made the playoffs, won a game. I think, if I'm not mistaken, they won the first game against Utah before Utah beat them in 5 in the first round. Another market like Portland as well, who, Portland's not like this huge major metropolitan area like Chicago or New York or something, but the NBA is a superstar league. And if you have stars like John Morant or Damian Lillard, or coincidentally CJ McCollum, who's obviously on the Pelicans now, then you can kind of build around that. I think one of the I don't want to say the bright side of Zion's injury, but one of the positives that you can look at is that they're in a position where New Orleans has to offer him the rookie extension this offseason. It would be dumb of them not to. And Zion probably has to take it because of his injury history. He can't probably bet on himself maybe as much as he would have wanted to a year ago in terms of what he might be able to get, in New York or Chicago or whatever. So you're going to have that guy on the team for the next, 4 or 5 years. You're going to have CJ McCollum for a little bit, Brandon Ingram, who's come along when he's healthy. When that team is healthy, then you add in, I think, who's one of the most important pieces is probably Herb Jones, somebody who can lock down, 2-way players on the other side. If you have a wing who's anywhere between, 6'3" and 6'9", Herb Jones can handle that assignment defensively. You don't wear out Ingram and Zion and CJ McCollum chasing somebody like that around. So, yeah, based on where they started, the way Willie Green turned it around. They've got a nice core there with the players who are playing. You add Zion to that. Like I mentioned at first, you got to look at a team like Memphis as someone or a team that you can kind of aspire to be. Okay, if Memphis can do this with its star, why can't we? So, and coincidentally, those two, worked out a trade, for swapping Steven Adams and Jonas Valanciunas, among others. So, maybe they already had those conversations when that trade was happening, and some backdoor, hey, see you in the conference finals in a couple of years type conversations. But one of them might get there this year. I'm not sure about New Orleans, but the future looks pretty good, better than it did certainly, maybe 9 or 10 months ago.
Those two franchises are going to be kind of, for better or worse for New Orleans, a little bit weirdly tied to each other for a while,
right?
Between that trade and the Zion and Ja draft.
Right.
As much momentum as Ja made in some of that pre-draft talk, but obviously Zion was kind of the consensus number one.
Yeah.
What have you made of Herb Jones, a second round pick out of Alabama, who I think a lot of people thought, okay, he'll go play in the G League. He'll have some opportunities to get a little bit of playing time and gain some experience and maybe be a little bit of a project, and instead becomes arguably a first team all NBA defensive player right off the bat. And a guy that I told a couple people over the last week or so, I think if he was playing elsewhere in the league and I saw this kid play defense the way he did, I would immediately latch onto him, even if he wasn't, representing New Orleans or Louisiana. He's such a fun player to watch. Again, as a second round rookie in his first year, what have you thought about his performance? Does he remind you of anybody starting out his NBA career and kind of filling that role, particularly that quickly?
It's kind of surprising that it's kind of lucky that he's in that position, because you would venture to guess that if Zion Williamson was healthy and if maybe Devontae Graham was off to a better start in New Orleans than he had been, maybe Herb Jones doesn't see that playing time that he's gotten this season. Obviously, with Willie Green and the staff doing practice, they may see some things and try to get him some playing time. But it's worked out to his benefit that there's kind of an open position when it comes to the on the wing and on the forward position for the Pelicans. Man, watching him play, for a lot of people who probably haven't seen a whole lot of him, the way he's flying around, he's lanky. He's getting up blocking shots on the perimeter, which is something you tell people a lot of times, don't try to go for a block on the perimeter, but if you're good at it, then go for it. You know what I mean? And he's obviously good at it. He kind of reminds me of, this is not a one-to-one comparison, and this guy is still pretty young too, but you look at Mikal Bridges in Phoenix, who is kind of their shutdown wing defender, kind of, not a big body, not a strong guy. Well, he's strong, but not as strong as a Zion or someone. And he kind of handles that defensive, assignment a lot of times, takes a lot of the pressure off of Devin Booker or Chris Paul, who don't have to run around chasing, a Drew Holiday or a Chris Middleton, maybe in the finals or something like that. So like I mentioned, he's a guy who is going to be as important to the Pelicans' future over the next 3 to 4 years, I think, as someone like a Zion. You know what I mean? Zion's going to score, defensively, hit or miss. Ingram has some length, but he's kind of hit or miss sometimes. CJ McCollum, hit or miss. You have that one guy who you can put in and say, okay, you go and guard, Kawhi Leonard, you guard Paul George, you guard, hell, John Morant even. He's quick, he's quick enough to kind of disrupt them, especially John Morant, who doesn't shoot a lot of threes. As long as Herb can get a hand up, even if John Morant goes by him, you can kind of disrupt the shot and stuff like that. So, it's exciting for him to, I'm sure exciting for a lot of Pelicans fans, as an Alabama guy, whatever, but, the way I know they beat LSU in the SEC title game in 2021. And, I'm not going to talk about that. I'm still a little hurt, but he's a good player, man. And they've got a really good, like you mentioned, the draft capital coming up. Trey Murphy is a really good shooter as well, who's going to obviously work his way into the lineup a little bit more. NBA is all about rotations. When they're healthy, they got to know who's picking up the slack for who, where everybody kind of fits when healthy. I'm curious to see what happens to Devontae Graham going forward.
Yeah.
They've got CJ McCollum playing more of an on-ball role. Jose Alvarado is kind of like Patrick Beverly light, just kind of coming in, being disruptive on the perimeter and frankly annoying. And if you're a fan of his team, it's not annoying, but I'm sure the other 29 teams in the league are like, what's wrong with this guy? And then if you're going to have somebody like Herb Jones, who's kind of going to play that on the perimeter as well. I wonder where Devontae Graham kind of fits in the next couple of years, whether they get a more, traditional point guard type who can maybe start next to McCollum, or do they kind of, ride it out with Devontae Graham as a six man? Like, it's going to be interesting to see how he fits into the puzzle after this season.
I was asked this weekend if you, in a hypothetical, an expectation that Zion is healthy to start next season, and you have a group of CJ McCollum, Brandon Ingram, Herb Jones, Zion Williamson, Jonas Valanciunas, and then, Jackson Hayes would kind of slip back into that off the bench role.
Mm-hmm.
Would there be any stars that I would be willing to disrupt that core to make a big play to go add another star? And I don't know that there are a lot of stars in the NBA that I'm willing to move off of what I'd have to move off of to go get someone who is potentially realistically attainable. Not that some of the top stars are attainable, but even in situations where if a Utah blows something up or whatever the case may be, I like that core enough. And honestly, you can tell me here if this part gets crazy. I think with some of the uncertainties about Zion, both health-wise and then how much does he want to be there long-term, I would be more willing potentially to give up Zion as a bigger piece of a package or the biggest piece in a trade to bring back some other pieces than I would Herb Jones, who I think would make up a smaller portion of a package going out, but I think is that valuable and sure of a piece to me continuing to progress moving forward. How insane is that? Or have you talked yourself into Herb Jones enough that you kind of see where I'm coming from?
I don't see where you're coming from completely. I think there was a real discussion probably before the season of like, okay, if you went back and redrafted 2019, do you take Zion or do you take Ja Morant? I think it's clear at this point, just because based on what's happened, you take Ja Morant. I might even argue that Zion doesn't even go second. I think you can make the argument for Darius Garland in that position. But Zion is such a unique, he's such a unicorn in what he does. Like, there's not a player in the league like him. And I think if you have a player like that, regardless of whatever their skill set is, like, you have to do what you can to hold on to them. He's a superstar. He gets people interested in New Orleans. There's obviously the ancillary benefits from social media and promotion and marketing and stuff that I think Zion is probably just a better fit for because of his name recognition than Herb Jones. Although Herb is a pretty good one name thing as well.
Oh, the not on Herb shirt is on the way to this apartment as we speak. It's shipping.
So yeah, I don't know, man. Like I think I agree. I think there's a good core there. I think you kind of have to see what that quote unquote big three of Zion, Ingram, and McCollum looks like together. Like, because there's going to be a point, which one of those guys is option C, and how do they take to that? Like, they've never had to be kind of in that position before. There was a lot of talk when Zion originally, and Ingram came over, who was going to be kind of the whose team it was going to be. And you saw a lot with Stan Van Gundy that year toward the end of the season, kind of running Zion as almost like a point forward type situation. McCollum is probably old enough and wise enough to kind of fill whatever role is needed. He was kind of, that option B next to Damian Lillard in Portland. He's getting up there in age. Not that he's old or anything, but he's not in his second, third, fourth season. So he has probably the mindset of, I'm going to do whatever it takes to win. What those three look like. And then maybe you get into a position where, okay, these two look really good together, but this other person doesn't. What do we do? And you've seen that happen. I'm not comparing these guys to Durant, Irving, and Harden, but you got to have a big three. Sometimes it meshes well. Sometimes it's pretty clear early on that there's not enough basketball to go around. All three of those guys, probably need the ball a little bit to kind of do what they do. Maybe McCollum less than the other two because he's played off the ball so often. So next season is going to be interesting to see how much better they are, but also going to, like we mentioned earlier, if they don't get off to maybe as good of a start as people are expecting, or there's some turbulence, what you do, as you kind of talked about, to kind of retool the roster around. I know Valanciunas has a 2-year extension that kicks in this offseason, if I'm not mistaken. They've got Devontae Graham, who's going to be there for a few more years. There's some things that you can move around to kind of keep at least 2 of those guys in place. But, it could be very possible that in a few years, the 3 of them aren't together. It's a good comparison. Now that I'm talking it through and thinking about it, obviously this team is a little bit better because, they're the 7th seed. But you look at Minnesota with Karl Anthony Towns, D'Angelo Russell, Anthony Edwards, kind of 3 youngish guys who are kind of, known for their offense and maybe not necessarily the other side of the ball. Guys who have come from elsewhere, obviously D'Angelo Russell with the Lakers and Brooklyn, and Anthony Edwards being kind of the young guy on there, and Karl Anthony Towns being the kind of veteran presence. Like, it's obviously working out for them, but those other guys are really what helps them out. Naz Reid didn't have a great game in the first game against Memphis, but he's having a backup center who can spell cat has done wonders for them. Patrick Beverley, New Orleans already has their Patrick Beverley and Jose Alvarado. So again, looking at other teams that they can kind of mirror themselves after, maybe they can get kind of a mix of Memphis and Minnesota and stir it up, make a roux and make it into like a gumbo type situation in 2023 and 2024.
You mentioned some of the benefits of CJ McCollum's leadership and all those intangibles and wisdom and experience that he has brought to the franchise. And I think a big storyline already, and certainly this offseason and moving forward, is how his presence and role impacts where Zion's head is at in a lot of ways, and helps kind of continue to bring him along as a young, still a young player, but developing over the next few years into, that much mature of a player and member of the league. How big is getting to the playoffs this year for this team, a team that again was kind of left for dead in a lot of opinions, to come back, make the playoffs, and now be on a court for a best of 7 series with the Phoenix Suns, to have all these young pieces that we're talking about just kind of get a taste of this? What does that mean for a franchise moving forward potentially?
Oh man, it's huge. It means that this season, regardless of what happens over the next week and a half, this season was a success. They made the playoffs, and they don't have their number 1 pick. He hasn't stepped foot on the court, on a real court, for a game all year. Like, that's, regardless of what happens, that's a positive thing to look at. And like you mentioned, CJ McCollum, maybe these young guys get down on themselves if they get, lose to Phoenix 4-0 or 4-1, but CJ McCollum can be like, look, guys, this is the start of something. This could be the start of something special. Again, look around the rest of the league. Look at Memphis. Got into the playoffs last year as an 8 seed. Now they have the 2nd best record in the league. Look at what Golden State did back, when Mark Jackson was there. They kind of slowly started building up with Curry and Thompson and Green, Harrison Barnes, those young guys. They made the playoffs a couple times, and then it kind of took off from there. So there's evidence in the league that if you build it, quote unquote, the right way, it can work out. Those situations are kind of different than like a 1-year type, oh, what the hell was that? I'm thinking of New York last season, where it all just kind of came together over the course of 1 year and then kind of regressed backwards. So there's some examples there of what of kind of building this the right way and taking this momentum into the offseason. And obviously they have a coach who the players seem to really enjoy, and who will probably be there over the next couple of years. So yeah, man, but making the playoffs is extremely important, regardless of the result. Just to be able to still be playing in the latter part of April and not already thinking about, who you're going to draft in the lottery is a good thing.
I think a lot of us are starting to wonder, who are they going to take in the draft with that Lakers?
Well, I know you are. You think about that. That's like a year-round thing, but you're also not a normal person. So,
looking at the LSU side of this conversation, and I alluded to Ben Simmons at the onset of this. You mentioned Naz Reid. You've expressed on social media excitement when Cam Thomas gets a chance to do anything from summer league all the way moving forward.
That's right.
Who have you most enjoyed with with some sort of LSU or Louisiana tie watching play this season, given that Ben Simmons has yet to play since we were watching the Philly fans call him a crumb bum last year after the Atlanta series?
You know what? I'm going to go off the radar for a little bit, and I'm going to say Trendon Watford. I didn't think Trendon Watford was going to get as much action maybe as he has this past season. Obviously, Portland had unique circumstances with Damian Lillard's injury and the CJ McCollum trade. They got rid of Norman Powell and Robert Covington. They shut down Nurkic after a while. They've got a whole lot of things going on over there, but you look at Trendon Watford's numbers. I think he was averaging, like 7 or 8 points a game and 4 or 5 rebounds, which is probably, for him to be getting playing time in the NBA is something I honestly didn't really expect his first year out. So I'm curious to see whether he makes his mark there in Portland as they kind of go through this rebuild and what kind of player he can be. I think those other guys, we know what they are, right? Like we know what Cam Thomas is. Cam Thomas is, as much as I love him, Cam Thomas's, ceiling is probably in the mold of a Jamal Crawford, Lou Williams type guy who's just kind of, going to come off the bench and, put up 15 or 20 points. He's not the point guard of the future for your organization. We know what Ben Simmons is. Naz Reid has settled into a really good role as a backup 5 over in Minnesota. But I'm interested to see kind of what happens with Trendon Watford going forward. Maybe it doesn't happen in Portland and it's elsewhere, and he takes his talents to to some other team and kind of builds on what he's done this year. But yeah, man, it's always good to see the LSU guys do well. And Cam Thomas probably isn't going to get a whole lot of playing time in the playoffs, but that's a nice piece going forward as a bench key cog on the bench whenever they whatever happens going forward with them. Goran Dragic is getting up there. He may not be on there for a long time. Kyrie Irving, is not. He still has to sign an extension. So maybe Cam Thomas's numbers improve next year. But yeah, always fun to watch them.
You say we know kind of who a lot of these guys are. Who, when, where, how, why is Ben Simmons right now? What's your sense of where he's at, and do you expect him to actually come along and make a playoff impact as quickly as Steve Nash and company are starting to kind of talk about being the case after it seemed like he was a ways off for a while, and now the dialogue is that it's a much quicker ramp up than it had seemed to be about a week or so ago?
Yeah, I mean, our Shams Sarania reported last week that they were targeting, or Simmons was targeting a return for the first round series around game 4, between game 4 and game 6, I believe was the range that he mentioned, which I believe that's the start of next week and the middle of next week. The thing with this series is because of there's an extra day between game 2 and 3 and between game 1 and 2. Game 2 isn't until Wednesday. Game 3, I believe, is Saturday. So there's still a week before that target date kind of gets here. Part of that is obviously it's working out because the Boston Marathon might be happening right as we're talking in Boston. But it seems like it's not going to be that big of a ramp up. The thing is, like, these guys also haven't played together a whole lot. Like, it's going to take, you'd rather go through that playing teams like, no offense to Orlando and Indiana and Houston, as opposed to a team with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. But I don't think the Nets are probably never going to say this, but I think their goal is the long game here, right? Like they have, Durant and Simmons under contract until 2025, and then a couple of first round picks from Philadelphia. Like that's not that bad of a that's not that bad of a starting point when you're building a team. You have maybe, when healthy, the best offensive player in the league and the best defensive player in the league. So like that's a pretty good starting point to be. Now the Nets probably can't say, as I mentioned, yeah, we're gonna punt on this season because of everything that went on. But even looking into the offseason over the next 2 or 3 years, they're going to be in a pretty good spot regardless of what happens in these playoffs. So yeah, we'll see. I don't know how much he's been practicing with the team in terms of getting a handle on whatever X's and O's need to occur. He has played mostly point guard. Obviously, that's not going to be the case with Kyrie Irving. He's not going to have the ball as much in his hand. He should probably be more of like a Draymond Green type guy, in the front court with Durant. And Durant has experience, obviously, playing with Draymond Green, so he can kind of bring some of that and say, hey, when we were here, Draymond did this, I did this. Kyrie can be the Steph guy, and find some success that way. But it's all going to be a matter of what happens when you get on the court. We play basketball not as well as them, but when you get on the court, you fall into old habits, and yeah, maybe you start, keeping the ball in your hands, or you pass up open looks. Like it's that's going to take some time to work out. That's just natural.
Do you think they come back from that loss in game one and they're able to make it out of this Boston series? Do you guys do public predictions, and have you already made predictions for how these playoffs play out?
I have not made any predictions about how the playoffs will play out. I think I have been. I'll tell you this. I put the Athletic did preseason predictions before the season of award winners and coach of the year and stuff like that. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm the only person that had Jason Tatum as MVP, and I think I might have had Ime Udoka as coach of the year before the season. I'm really high on Boston. I was in October and November. Only thing that I was worried about with them was whether Marcus Smart would kind of work as a full-time point guard, and that has worked out. They've got Derek White, who's kind of a great six man who can kind of play any guard position that they need. I think Boston's going to win the series. It may go 6 or 7 games, but like I mentioned earlier, like you needed a superhero level performance from Kyrie and still a lot of points from Durant for them to even be close to what to matching Boston. It's like Charles Barkley and Shaq like to say, what about the other guys? It's what about those other guys, what the other guys do in games. And I think that's going to be the story for Brooklyn. Seth Curry, who did not play that well last week, Andre Drummond, Patty Mills, Goran Dragic, Bruce Brown. Like, what can they do to help supplement what Kyrie and Durant are going to give you?
If you were big on the Celtics in October and November, that was a pretty difficult time to be big on the Celtics compared to right now. Do you see them as, I'll just take it to, who do you see advancing to conference semifinals? I think we're at this point on this Phoenix Suns Golden State collision course out west. The East has been ramping up toward one of the most fun East playoffs in a while. I feel like the balance of power has kind of swung in terms of the depth of power has kind of swung back East. But I think that Milwaukee Boston series in round 2 is kind of the team to beat for me, whoever can come out of that. But how do you see things shaping up, not just the rest of this week, but beyond?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the West. Like, if Golden State plays like it did in game 1, it's going to be tough for anybody to beat them. Even Phoenix, if they get there, it's going to be really interesting to see. It's obviously a question of health with them. Steph Curry's foot, Draymond Green's back. I've been high on Boston out publicly, and publicly is just like this one story we did at the Athletic. But as you know, personally, months ago when we were talking about the Eastern Conference, I pointed out Miami, and Miami is the 1 seed. So I think they've got a veteran point guard who's been there. Kyle Lowry has won championships. Udonis Haslem, I think founded Florida. Like, that's how. So he's been there a while as well. They got a championship coach. I could certainly see just kind of 1 versus 2 in the conference finals, but in the East. But I mean, I wouldn't count on Milwaukee. I think people are kind of not low on Milwaukee, but just kind of, I don't know if the word is tired of them, or just kind of, they've been around for so long that people are looking for the shiny new toy. Like, but the regular season didn't mean anything to them, right? Like they knew they were going to make the playoffs. This is what it's about for them in the postseason, after having the best record a couple of years ago and then losing to Miami. Their big question was whether Brook Lopez would be back, and he, after missing most of the season, and he looks like he's back after that performance in game 1. So it wouldn't surprise me if either of those top 3 teams got out of the East. If I had to predict, I would predict Milwaukee getting back to the finals, just because I don't see those other teams being significantly better enough to just kind of give the benefit of the doubt to the defending champions. But it's gonna be fun to watch. I'm curious to see what happens in the 4-5 matchup. I mean, I think Philly got off to a great start, but they're going to be at a slight disadvantage when they go to Toronto with Batiste not being able to play because of his vaccination status. But also, I think Toronto fully healthy probably gives them a run. But if they don't have Scotty Barnes and, Thaddeus Young for a lot of the series and Gary Trent Jr., that might help them. But Nick Nurse is one of the best coaches in the league. So I think he'll figure something out to make that series competitive. But it's going to be fun, man. It's fun.
Obviously, I mean, go Pels and all that, Louisiana versus all y'all and whatnot. But I've had a lot of love longstanding for Golden State and Milwaukee franchises. And I think if that happened would be the most.
Can you survive that? Like, I don't know. Like,
I was trying
I have to fly home and like take care of you for.
I was trying to think of an instance in maybe any sport where two of my favorite couple of teams ended up competing for a championship. And I think this would be the first time that it wasn't a matter of like a team that I either kind of like versus a team that I hate, or a team that I really like versus a team that I'm indifferent about at best. Like, to have two teams of that standing in my heart would be pretty crazy. I also
heard on June 1st, they're doing a versus with J. Cole and Anderson .Paak.
Oh, so that is the Warriors Bucks finals of versus.
So you should, so just get prepared for all of that.
But I was gonna say, even last year,
that was a good joke. I'm proud of that. I'm very proud of that joke.
You just made my summer already. And it's like 60 degrees in Baton Rouge today for some reason. I was gonna say, when you said that people seem like they're kind of over Milwaukee, I felt like people felt over Milwaukee last year.
Yeah.
Giannis is not I feel like Giannis's non-shooting game has just made everyone get tired of him bulldozing his way and kind of overlook some of the skill that comes into that. But to see Milwaukee climb that mountain last year and then I think end up being kind of right where probably they want to be as a top 3 seed and playing well at the right time. They're certainly right where I was kind of hoping they'd be at, even to the point of wanting them to land the Bulls in the first round instead of one of these other teams. The 5 and 7 were certainly looking difficult. But
and you know what helps out with that too is, as you know, because we've spent some time in that area of the country. Like, Milwaukee and Chicago are an hour apart, hour and a half at most. Like, you're not having to fly New York to Miami or Toronto to Atlanta or something like that in the first round. I mean, it kind of benefits a lot of the teams in the conference. Like, Boston and Brooklyn aren't that far, but man, like, I don't know what their plan is, but Milwaukee or Chicago might have gone back to Chicago for a day before going back out to Milwaukee, and Milwaukee can do the same if this gets to game 6 and then game 4 and stuff. So, that travel is going to kind of help them. I agree about the fatigue thing, but Giannis has been so good that I think there was a sense of individual fatigue, maybe even last year, looking at some of his numbers. And I think the early part of this year, people saying like, can Giannis really be like an MVP, favorite again? And he's been so good that he's a finalist, you know what I mean? And any of those guys, him, Jokic, and Embiid, like, there's an argument to be made for any of them to be MVP. And so just through sheer wheel of force, like, he's just going to make you talk about Milwaukee, and that team is going to be something to, contend with in the East.
Every time I think I'm about to close it, you make me think of something else to ask you. The finalists for the MVP being Jokic, Embiid, and Giannis, and some of the other dynamics we talked about with big men. We've seen DeAndre Ayton come along and be great. Jonas and New Orleans has kind of played this season as Jackson Hayes emerged as the 4 with sort of a twin tower dynamic. Cleveland was having so much success with all of those bigs. Do you see the league starting to zag back at all toward more emphasis on big men than what we had seen for a while? Or are the guys that we're looking at just such outliers that it's going to be tough to sustain that as they get older?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, yes, in a sense, but like, are they really outliers when you have half the league? You know what I mean? If you look across the league, Miami has Bam Adebayo, Utah has Rudy Gobert, Minnesota has Karl Anthony Towns. Like, these are all all-star level centers.
I love hearing you give Bam his flowers. People,
not to mention, I'm not going to get into that on here. Not to mention, the guys you talked about in Embiid and Jokic and stuff. So maybe there is kind of a more room for the big man nowadays, but these big men are different than other big men have ever been. Like, Karl Anthony Towns won the 3-point shootout at All-Star Weekend. DeAndre Ayton hit a couple of threes, at least 1 3 in Game 1 against the Pelicans, and was just kind of knocking down that free throw line jumper consistently. Embiid can knock down threes. Jokic is maybe the best passer in the league. So it's about more than just size. When we talk about big men, it's just kind of a different skill set than we saw with guys like Olajuwon and Robinson and Ewing, and even going around to like the Dwight Howard era. It's just kind of a different skill set and different things that they can do on the court. So maybe you do see a little more of that going forward, and continuing obviously with this current crop. Embiid and Jokic are going to be around for a couple more years, so they're going to be the gold standard, and we'll see if anybody else comes up to try to take that from them. Maybe a Chet Holmgren or something. It's kind of the next one out of Gonzaga potentially.
I'm incredibly torn and excited to see what Chet Holmgren becomes at the next level. But man, I'll let you get out of here, get back to work. It's playoff time. I've got to get back to filing my taxes on April 18th. So I appreciate you taking far more time than probably you needed to take away to chat about some NBA playoffs and bigger picture stuff.
Hey, anything for you, brother. Subscribe to The Athletic. Follow along in our NBA coverage and everything else we got over there. Great sports writers, great content. If you're a sports fan, it is a must.
There you go. Company man, Tyler Batiste,
right here.
The NBA managing editor for The Athletic. Thanks again, as always. And for Louisiana versus all y'all, Jared Roser.